The West has often claimed to support Africa's rise from poverty through aid packages, peacekeepers, development loans, all dressed up neatly as generosity. But look closer and you'll see the fine print. See, behind the handshakes and press releases was exploitation, proxy wars, corporate extractions, and quiet coups staged in boardrooms and embassies. They didn't fear Africa failing, they feared Africa succeeding on its own terms. And nowhere was that fear more exposed than in Congo 1960, where one man stood up and said, "We will no longer be ruled, we will rule ourselves." His name was Patrice Lumumba, a man who believed Africa didn't need charity, it needed power and control over its own destiny. He didn't ask for permission, and for that he was marked. This is a story of what happens when a colony dares to break free, when a people start to dream, not of survival, but of sovereignty. Before the music, the speeches, and the flags, Congo was one of the most brutally exploited colonies on Earth. A land rich beyond imagination with gold, diamonds, copper, uranium, and many other natural resources, but none of it belonged to the people who lived there. See, first came King Leopold II, who ruled Congo like his private plantation, turning human lives into a business model. Hands were chopped, families were destroyed, and millions of Congolese people died. Then came Belgium, the so-called civilizing force, bringing schools, railways, and Christian missions, but they weren't teaching liberation, they were training obedience. For most Congolese, there were no rights, no citizenship, no say. They weren't citizens of Belgium, they were subjects of empire. Even as the world talked of human rights and democracy after World War II, Congo remained locked in the 19th century. But underneath that silence, something was stirring. A new generation was coming of age, educated, urban, and connected. And among them was a man named Patrice Lumumba. Born in 1925 in the small village of Onalua, Lumumba wasn't born into power. He didn't grow up rich, but he was sharp and very curious. A reader, a writer, and a speaker. He devoured the works of Voltaire, Rousseau, and Victor Hugo, writers who taught him about liberty, justice, and revolution. He worked as a postal clerk, then a beer salesman. But more importantly, he worked with people. He listened, debated, and organized. Over time, he became something very rare. A Congolese man who could speak to the colonizer in their own language but still speak for his people in their own voice. He didn't beg for reform, he demanded equality. He spoke of unity across tribes, religions, and regions. He saw Congo as one nation, not a puzzle of ethnic maps, and that made him very dangerous. Because while Belgium hoped to divide and control, Lumumba was trying to unite and ignite. And just as he was stepping into the spotlight, the whole country and the continent was changing around him. Before the world knew the name Patrice Lumumba, something else was happening, something powerful and electric. Culture was changing. Even before Congo became officially independent, the late 1950s and early 60s saw Congolese identity begin to break free from Belgian control, not just in politics, but in everyday life, music, fashion, sports, language, media, and art. People were starting to define themselves on their own terms, not as subjects of European colony, but as modern Africans. And if there was a soundtrack to this transformation, it was Congolese rumba. You had bands like African Jazz, led by Joseph Kabasele, dropping the hits like Independence Cha-Cha. It wasn't just a banger, it was a national anthem of liberation. It played everywhere, on radios, in bars, across dusty roads and crowded cities. And it wasn't just a Congolese hit, it echoed across the continent. There was also Le Sable, a fashion movement where Congolese men turned colonial clothing into statements of defiance and pride. Bright suits, bold colors, European cuts with African attitude. Even language was transforming. French wasn't the only tongue of expression anymore. Lingala was on the rise, reclaimed, revived, and blasted through music and mass media. The visual arts exploded, murals, comics, political posters. Young artists were using color and canvas to reimagine African identity. And for the first time, mass media stopped echoing the colonizer and started amplifying the people. And then there was football. No, not that football, this one. Across Africa, the game was catching fire, not just as a sport, but as a statement. A way to show the world that Africans could unite, compete, win, and do it on their own terms. From Accra to Kinshasa to Khartoum, you had local clubs becoming symbols of resistance, pride, and Pan-African possibility. In other words, the people weren't just demanding freedom, they were living it. By the time Lumumba entered politics, Congo wasn't waiting for permission, it was already boiling with possibility. Urban youth, musicians, thinkers, everyday people, they weren't just waiting for Belgium to hand them independence, they were building it. In the clubs, in the salons, on the streets. And this cultural fire, it lit the fuse for a political explosion. Because once people start seeing themselves differently, it becomes impossible to go back. So while Congo's streets were alive with rhythm, style, and rebellion, Belgium was beginning to see the writing on the wall. Independence was coming, but they still wanted to control the transition, to handpick the right black leaders, slow walk reforms, and keep the real power in white hands, so to speak. But then came Patrice Lumumba. He wasn't just another politician, he was something else. In 1958, he co-founded the Congolese National Movement. And unlike most political groups at the time, it wasn't tribal and it wasn't regional, it was national, secular, inclusive. It was aimed at uniting Congo, not dividing it into little fiefdoms that could be easily controlled. Lumumba wasn't a tribal chief, he wasn't a colonial puppet, and he definitely wasn't looking to trade one foreign master for another. He was a Pan-Africanist. He believed in African unity. He wanted Congo to stand independent, not just from Belgium, but from the Cold War powers too. In 1958, Lumumba traveled to Ghana for the All-African Peoples Conference, where he met revolutionaries, thinkers, and leaders from all over the continent. And he held his own. Even Kwame Nkrumah was impressed by the man. Back home though, that cultural shift, the music, the style, the defined pride, it fed directly into his message. Imagine hearing Independence Cha-Cha on the radio and then seeing Lumumba speak on stage about justice, sovereignty, and unity. It all felt connected. It felt like divine intervention. He wasn't just talking about policy in the abstract, he was talking about possibility, about dignity, a Congo that belonged to its people, not foreign powers or mining companies. And when the May 1960 elections rolled around, the people responded. Despite being surveilled, arrested, and pressured, the MNC won big. And Lumumba, once a postal clerk, was named Congo's first prime minister. It was historic. But make no mistake, Belgium wasn't done, and neither was the West. Because for all their talk about democracy and stability, they truly feared Lumumba. He was simply too bold, too independent, too unwilling to play the game. He wouldn't sell off Congo's resources. He wouldn't bend to foreign pressure, and he sure as hell wouldn't stay in line. So even before his government could begin, the plot to remove him was already in motion. June 30th, 1960, Independence Day. Congo was free, at least on paper. The Belgian flag came down, the Congolese flag went up. There were smiles, speeches, salutes. But under the surface, the air was tense. Because Belgium hadn't really let go. They agreed to independence, but rushed it. There was no transition, no real training, and no plan. A country the size of Western Europe had 0 African generals, no Congolese judges, barely any administrators. The Belgians knew there would be chaos. In fact, they were counting on it. And then came the ceremony. The King of Belgium at the time took stage. He praised the genius of King Leopold, the same man who turned Congo into a slaughterhouse just years prior. The crowd watched, silent, but felt insulted. And then Patrice stepped forward. He wasn't invited to speak. He wasn't on the program, but he went up anyway. Patrice did not hold back. There was no thanks, no flattery, no historical whitewashing. He looked the king in the eye and spoke directly to the people, saying, "We are no longer your monkeys. Our wounds are too fresh to forget. Our independence was not a gift. It was won through struggle and blood and pain." The room froze. Belgian officials were furious. Western diplomats were shocked. But on the streets of Congo, the people erupted. They saw him not just as a leader, but as a mirror of everything they had been feeling. Dignity, pride, fury, hope. Lumumba hadn't just declared independence, he declared the truth. After independence, Congo had the flag, the anthem, and the promise of a new beginning. But it didn't have control. Belgian officers still commanded the army. Belgian companies still ran the mines, and in the shadows, Western governments were watching, plotting, and completely worried. Because Lumumba wasn't just talking about freedom anymore, he was truly acting on it. He pushed for total independence, economic, not just political. He reached out to other African leaders. He refused to align with the West. And when Belgium backed a secession in the mineral-rich province of Katanga, Lumumba called it exactly what it was, an imperialist power grab. So he fought back, but against an enemy that was being supported by Belgian forces. Lumumba knew he simply could not win that fight alone. He asked the United Nations for help, but he was ignored. He reached out to the United States. Again, he was either dodged or delayed. With no other options left, Lumumba reached out to the Soviet Union. But it wasn't an alliance with the East, it was a lifeline for Congo. But that was all the excuse the West needed. To them, Lumumba had crossed the line. He wasn't just an independent now, he was dangerous. You see, during World War II, America made its first atomic bomb and dropped it on Japan. The whole world saw just how destructive that bomb was. After the war, the entire world was in a nuclear arms race trying to make their own bomb. The thing is, the uranium that America used for that bomb was from Congo. And Congo didn't just have lots of uranium, they had the best kind. And Lumumba aligning himself with the Soviets would give them access to this very precious resource. America simply couldn't have this, so President Dwight Eisenhower gave the order to eliminate Patrice Lumumba. The CIA got to work immediately. They needed to find someone from the inner circle, someone who was not only willing to get rid of Lumumba, but would be obedient to the United States after Lumumba's demise. And inside his own government, someone was waiting, someone close, a friend, Joseph Mobutu, a young army officer, once Lumumba's trusted ally. The West saw an opportunity in him and they took it. They funneled money to Mobutu and gave him support, intelligence, and quiet approval. It wasn't long before Mobutu turned. Just weeks after independence, Lumumba was placed under house arrest. Then he was handed over not to a court and not to a prison, but to his enemies in Katanga, the very enemies backed by Belgium. They beat him, humiliated him, and tortured him. And on January 17, 1961, Lumumba disappeared from the face of the earth. In his last days, Lumumba wrote a final letter to his wife, Pauline. These were some of his words. "Neither brutality, nor cruelty, nor torture will ever bring me to beg for mercy. I prefer to die with my head held high, unshakable in my faith and confident in the destiny of my country. The future of Africa is bright. Africa will write its own history, a history not written in Brussels, Washington, or Paris, but by Africans themselves, a history of glory and dignity. Long live the Congo. Long live Africa.